Well, good morning. Good morning. For those in the room, welcome. Glad to be with you today. And for those joining us online, welcome as well. If I've not had a chance to meet you yet, I'm Mike. I'm one of the pastors here. We're so glad you're worshiping with us today. As we have been kind of working through this post-season, or post-Easter time, I had a Caesar salad dressing from my brain's got on Caesar for whatever reason. Easter, let's go to Easter. As we're coming out of Easter, we're in this season of looking at what it means to have a seat at the table, what it means to belong to something larger than who we are. And Noel kicked us off a couple weeks ago and talked about David inviting the son of his former best friend to come have a seat at the table. And last week I talked specifically, and I want to talk just a moment about what I talked about last week, and I promise not to use any Greek words today. If you want the Greek words, they were all in last Sunday's message. I gave you a bunch of them. But I essentially pointed out that out of the New Testament, there is so much of these words like church that we think mean something to us. But the word for church was really a description. It was the way they gathered together. It was this word meaning gathering and assembling. But that the word for the early church that was most often used to describe them was brothers and sisters or household. It's the way they lived life together. That God intended the church to be a family. Which again, we talked about last week, can be rather awkward when we're a part of the family, right? So this week we're going to move to this idea of what does it mean to invite to the table and who's welcome. I'll give it away right now. All are welcome, okay? It may or not surprise you, but all are welcome at the table. And last week we talked about this idea of belonging and what does it mean to belong to something larger than who we are. This week we're really going to push in this idea of what does it mean to be welcoming. And I was thinking about this from the standpoint of when I think about who I want at my table, maybe you're not at all like me. Maybe you are super risking and loving and grace-filled to all kinds of people. But for me, sometimes when I get around a dinner table or a meal, I want to be with people who are like me, that make it easy for me to just be who I am. And I think that actually goes contrary to what scriptures talk about the way the early church lived life together, that all were welcome to the table. And that Jesus actually came and broke down all kinds of socioeconomic divides and made the family something that truly was the family of creation, not the family of that day. So, as I think about who I would want to invite to the table, I don't know that I would always go where Jesus would go, but that Jesus constantly challenges us to make it available to people who are not like us, who challenge the way we think, who believe different things, maybe are on different ends of the spectrum from us politically or economically, or even places where they live or work or hang out. But God's kingdom, here's what I can promise you, is that when you say yes to following Jesus, that when you get to heaven, we're all going to be together. And there will be none of the divides. And that was Jesus' intention. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to look at a story as Jesus walks through the city of Jericho. We're going to look at his engagement as he walks in and his engagement as he walks out. And I think it says a lot about the way that Jesus was interacting with the people of the day. All right? And maybe what it means for us to be really welcoming for all at the table. So I'm going to pray real quick. We're going to dive in. We're going to go to the end of Luke 18, and then we're going to hit the first part of Luke 19. Jesus, you are good. Your plans for us are good. Your desire for us to live life together is brilliant. It's perfect. It's the way it should be. And Lord, I pray that as we are on this earth, before we get to life in eternity, where it's going to be perfect, that we would see glimpses. We would see first fruits. We would see moments where you are moving. And Lord, for some of us, I just feel like there's even this hurt from past church families, past people who claim to be brothers and sisters. I pray, Lord, that you would come and meet us in those places and give us willingness and courage to risk again and to be family. In your name we pray. Amen. So Luke 18, I'm going to start in verse 35. Jesus is approaching Jericho. This is towards the end of his ministry. We know from here he actually heads towards Jerusalem. If you match up John with Luke, we know that from this point he actually goes to the moment with Lazarus is not far away. And so then Jesus is headed towards the triumphal entry. In fact, the next story in Luke after the Zacchaeus story is the triumphal entry. But there's lots of stuff that happens, and what I want you to see is that we're reaching the end, but we're also at the height of Jesus' influence. In other words, word of him has spread, and it's being talked about all over the countryside. And so as he heads into Jericho, he has this incredible encounter with this man begging by the road, blind man. So verse 35, as Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. All right, let me give you a little bit of context. So first century Middle Eastern world, the way it worked is when a person of great renown would come to a city, that the city elders and leaders would actually send people out to greet them and to escort them into the place. Okay? So I want you to picture what's happening here. And when it says that he hears the crowds, the beggar goes, this is not just the normal crowds. Something else is happening. It means that somebody important has come to the city. So they send a whole group of people out there. They follow him in. They help walk him into the city. By the way, there's this whole protocol in the first century world, Middle Eastern world, where then there was all these certain things that Jesus was supposed to do. He was supposed to say things like, hey, would you by chance have a place for us to eat tonight? Would you by chance have a place for us to stay tonight? Now remember, it's not just Jesus, and it's not just the 12. There's a whole bunch of other people with him. So as Jesus is coming in, all these city leaders and all these city people are sending out people to escort them into the city. There's a huge crowd of people kind of moving in. The beggar's like going, hey, what's going on? And the people say, hey, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. Verse 38, they called out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. So here we have this beggar, this man who's blind, that the way he makes money is by begging and asking for the help of others. Jesus, this traveling hero, is coming to town, and everybody's telling the beggar, be quiet. Actually, Mark's version tells us that his name is Bartimaeus, which means son of filth. And the translation there in Mark is actually shut up. What we can determine really quickly about this blind man is he is on the very bottom of the social scale. The very bottom of the economic scale, very bottom of, he is the guy who's at the bottom. And he's being treated really, really poorly. Now, we've all had these moments, right? We've all had these moments where we're around and some people are hard to be around, or we're not quite sure what to do. I'm just going to share a kind of rather embarrassing moment about myself from this week. Is that okay if I talk about how lame I am? We went and had lunch with some friends this week, and while we were there was an adult special needs man who was there, who worked there, was kind of clearing up and cleaning everything. And for whatever reason, he was really taken with Christy, my wife. And so he probably passed by our table 30 times and said hi. And so, it was sweet. The first 5 or 6 times I said hi back. And then at some point, I'm trying to focus on the people across the table from me. And I'm not doing a good job anymore. I'm just going, yeah, hey, right? I mean, that thing we do when we go, that's enough. And of course, he's not going to read the social cue and realize what I'm saying is, hey, we're trying to have a conversation here. My sweet wife gets up and goes engages with him, asks him his name, sees him, like really sees him. And I was so convicted. And I'm saying, I'm sitting there, I'm just confessing now that I had this moment where I went, yeah, I'm going to share a story about Bartimaeus being ignored as Jesus comes into town, and I just flat ignored this guy for half an hour. So just going to confess, it's not always as easy as Scripture makes it sound. That's why he's Jesus and we are not, okay? All right, so verse 40. People are yelling at him, telling him to shut up. Jesus stopped and ordered the man brought to him. Okay, here's a great moment where we get to see that Jesus stands against injustice, right? He actually takes the very people who were telling Bartimaeus to shut up, and he says, hey, go get him. Oh, I love it. All right, sorry. When he came near, Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? Now, this is a powerful moment, and I want to pause in this moment. Lord, what do you want me to do for you? And he says, Lord, I want to see, but I want to explain to you what the question Jesus is really asking. Is if I give you your sight back, you have lost your livelihood. And let me explain what I mean by that. Jewish Old Testament law said that you were supposed to give a portion to people who were begging. You're supposed to give something to people who were waiting at the gates who could not take care of themselves. And there was a portion of your tenth, in other words, of your tithing, that you were supposed to give to people in those kinds of places. And so what would happen is that the way the transaction would work in first century world is that people would come into town. He was sitting in this place where his people were coming in. And he would say, and he wouldn't say, hey, help me so that I can eat. He would say, hey, fulfill your obligation to God by helping me. And then people would give him a coin or two. And then he would make this grand proclamation. He would step up and bless the people, bless their family. And it was this whole kind of ritual thing that would happen. But that's how he made his money. He spent all of his day encouraging people to give to God through him, and then he would bless them. So what's happening in this moment is that Jesus is basically really asking the question behind the question. What do you really want? Because I could give you a coin or two, but that's not going to solve your long-term problem. And if I give you what you want, it may actually make things worse for a while. What you're asking for is going to make life a little bit more difficult. You're going to be able to see now. People are not going to just give you money. You're going to have to go get a job. And you may not have a trade. You may have been blind since birth. We just don't know. So it's a powerful, powerful question that Jesus is asking. The man responds, Lord, I want to see. Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw it, they also praised God. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want this morning? If God showed up, like in a really personal, tangible, physical way and said, I'll give you one thing. What do you want? And it can't be like the genie in the bottle where you say, okay, I want 3 more wishes, right? No. What do you want? What's the thing that stirs in your heart that you want? It's a powerful question. And it's one I think we need to wrestle with a little bit, because I think sometimes the answers we give might be real surface. Or they might be so grand that God's going, no, what do you want for you? All right, so let's move on. Chapter 19, verse 1. I think sometimes Scripture, the way the Bible's broken up, actually does it in justice. I think it messes things up, because I think you could have stopped at the end of the story and gone, man, what a powerful story. And I think you would have missed the other half of what happens as Jesus goes through Jericho. Okay, so 19, verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. This is AKA Jesus has not responded with the proper protocol. He hadn't said, hey, you guys have a place for us to stay? Somebody going to feed us tonight? What's happening here? A man was there, verse 2, by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and he was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. There is a whole lot going right here, and no, I'm not going to sing the Zacchaeus song. For those who know the Zacchaeus, the wee little man song, I'm not going to do that. But Kelly and Children's Ministry would be glad to sing it for you if you'd like. So, what's happening here is that Zacchaeus is a tax collector. And I need to explain what tax collectors are a little bit, because what's happening here is kind of an amazing moment. Zacchaeus, as a tax collector, what that means is the Roman government, the way they would do things is when they came and took over an area, they would say, hey, I need a local person to collect taxes. And then they would farm it out. And they would basically say to some of the more prominent local people that were of Jewish descent in this case, because Jericho is a Jewish city, they would say, hey, we need a few different Jewish people to give us a bid on how much you think you can collect every year in taxes. And so these Jewish people would come in, people that were looking for more money, they were looking for more status, more power. They would come in and they would basically bid and say, well, I think I can collect this much in a year, or I think I can collect this much in a year. So Zacchaeus, as a tax collector, what it tells you is that he outbid other citizens of that city to collect the taxes. So then what he would do is he would then basically strong-arm people into paying their taxes, and then whatever he collected above and beyond what the Roman government wanted, he got to keep for himself. That's how he made his living. So I guess you would get this right away, but it means that Zacchaeus might be the least popular person in the city. He's turned on his own people. He's taking advantage of them for his own power and gain and wealth. And he's what I have often described as the Middle Eastern mafia. Like really, he's running around from business to business, strong-arming people to make them pay. So Zacchaeus has this moment where he goes, I want to see this guy Jesus that everybody's talking about. And for Zacchaeus to hear about Jesus means everybody's talking. Because nobody's talking to Zacchaeus. It means he's hearing conversations as he's walking from place to place, strong-arming people. So Zacchaeus runs ahead, which, by the way, was very non-Middle Eastern, male, patriarch kind of way. He was running, climbs up in a tree, which also most dudes in the Middle Eastern first century world didn't do. Climbs up in this tree. Sycamore trees were known for their leaves, so he could very well have been hidden, or he could have tried to been hide. He probably is also thinking, if I'm in that crowd of people, I'm no longer in charge. I could be in a lot of trouble, but I want to see Jesus. So he climbs up in this tree. All right, verse 5. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. All right, this is an amazing moment. It's an amazing moment. Jesus is on his way out of town. He has ignored all of the religious protocols, all of the right ways in which the world did things in that day. He's basically taken his whole crew, and I'm sure, by the way, that some of his people are anybody ever road trip with family, right? Can we stop? Can we stop now, please? Can we stop? They have food here. Can we stop? There's food there, right? I really need to use the restroom. I could use a nap. So anybody know what I'm talking about, right? When you road trip with family or people, this is what happens. So Jesus has got this massive crowd of people, and since he's Jesus, he knows everybody's thinking, right? So I'm sure in that moment, all these people are going, wait, we're not stopping here tonight? He just goes right through town. And we know it's through town because there were no sycamore trees allowed in town. It was always on the outside. So he's now passed all the way through town, not stayed, spots the most hated person in the city. The most hated person in the city. The oppressor. The person who has stood against everything. He's betrayed his own people for power and for money. He has taken advantage of others. He is the worst of the worst in the culture. Jesus spots him in a tree and goes, hey, Zacchaeus, can I hang out at your place tonight? Let's have some dinner. Throw a party. And do you think they muttered? No, they did more than mutter. It's a polite way of saying they were really, really mad. They lost their minds. So powerful. Here's what becomes dangerous, is if we take the story of Zacchaeus by itself and we miss what happens when Jesus walks into town and he responds to the least of these, then we miss the big picture of what he's saying. It would be easy to say he stands on behalf of either or. It would be easy to take one story and say, well, Jesus absolutely cares for this. Well, he does. Or Jesus absolutely cares for this. Well, he does. What Jesus cares for is people. And all of these labels that get thrown on others, all of these places where we have even found our own identity, and we have said, well, this is just who I am. Jesus cuts right through all of that, and he goes right to the heart. And he sees the person for who they are, not for what they've become. I don't know about you, but for me, that is the good news. That in all of my brokenness and all of my mess and all the mistakes that I've made and continue to make, Jesus goes right past that, right to the heart. Because he cares about us here. It's a beautiful story. I want to point out that the only people he seems to oppose in this story are the crowd. He ruins all of their expectations of him. All the plans they had, and believe me, they had plans. They had a place picked out for Jesus to come, to eat a meal together. They probably had different homes for different people to stay at. There was this massive plan that he walked through and just ignored to see these two different people, Bartimaeus and Zacchaeus. And I think what's fascinating for me is that when we come to Jesus without expectations, he comes right to the heart. And he gets right past all the other stuff. This kind of feels like our Imaginary Jesus series, doesn't it? Where all these people are putting things on Jesus, trying to get him to act the way they wanted to. And he went right past that to the people who needed him most. So what do we do with this? Oh, wait, let me finish Zacchaeus' response because it's really beautiful. Verse 8, Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Basically, he's saying, I'm going to give it all away. I'm going to give it all away. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house because this man too is the son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." It's a beautiful, beautiful response by Zacchaeus. So what do we do with this? What are we supposed to do with this? Well, let's come back to the idea of table. Being together at the table, having a table where it all can belong. I think the challenge is that we sometimes try to play Jesus and offer grace where God's not offering grace. And then there's other times where we don't recognize the grace that God is offering others, and all we want is our judgment or our idea of what judgment or justice looks like. And so there's a beautiful in-between where we go, God, I'm going to try to love who's in front of me and trust that what you're doing is your plan for their life. And so we have to be careful that we don't go rescue people that God's working with. And we also have to be careful that we're not pile on people that God's trying to bring to life. And I think I just described Bartimaeus and Zacchaeus as both there. So we have to be careful in this picture of grace. But by the way, the grace here is costly. It's costly for both of these men. They both lose all of their income by responding to this grace. And believe me, it's cost them everything. And so there's a powerful place here of God's grace is free, but it's not cheap. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says in his book, The Cost of Discipleship, that God's grace is free, but it's not cheap. There is a cost to following Jesus. So then what's the second part for us? What are we supposed to do with this? I want to finish with some theology. Can we talk a little theology right now? Theology is just the study of God, by the way. I know it sounds like it's a quarter. It's a 10-cent word, as my dad used to say. I think they're now 50-cent words or whatever with inflation. But theology sounds like this word that we go, oh, they're so studied. What theology basically means is a way we see God. It's a way we study or understand God. Well, there are two competing sets of theology that I think they really fit here. One's called the Circle Set Theology. The other one's called Center Set. And the way this works is, I'm going to have you look. We've got a little thing here, and we're going to represent Jesus with the cross, okay? So Jesus is the cross. And what happens often for us as Christians is that we draw a circle around this cross. And then we say, are you in or are you out? And so the in or out, or the people, or the X's are represented by people who have made a decision for Jesus or they've not made a decision for Jesus. And this is called Circle Set Theology, where everything becomes about, have you made a decision? Are you in? Have you made the decision, brother or sister, right? We've made it all about that. I think we miss the thing that Jesus was just doing here. And I also think that we miss the thing that Jesus is continuing to do. Is the question is not whether you're in or out. The question is whether or not you're moving towards Jesus or away from him. And then I actually think centered set theology says just remove the circle. And what we want to do is participate with people who are moving towards Jesus, and we want to avoid those who are moving away. And then Jesus, by the way, this was the way it was always designed, then Jesus gets to judge the in or out pieces. It's not ours to judge anyways. And we spend way too much time trying to define in and out versus going, God, what are you doing now? Who's moving towards you? And how can I participate with that? And so when we talk about what we want for Smoky Hill Vineyard, let me just, church, family, this is what we want. We want to have seats at the table for people who are moving towards Jesus no matter where they are. No matter what their history's been like, no matter what their journey's like, no matter whether they're still trying to figure it out, whether they just for the first moment have gone, I'm willing to at least talk about Jesus, or I'm willing to be around people who will talk about Jesus. That's in, that's moving. Let's go. Come on. Let's take those people and invite them to the table. And this is what it means to have a seat at the table, a place at the table, is that we make the table bigger. And we're more concerned with whether people are moving towards Jesus or away. We don't get into defining and judging. That's not our place. We let God sort that stuff out. Here's the danger of what I'm proposing, by the way. It is messy. It's messy. Because I'm messy. And I'm imperfect. And I'm still trying to figure out what it means to keep moving towards Jesus. And people all along the spectrum are trying to figure these things out. And it's not a clean, straight line. It's not linear. It doesn't work like I do step A and then step B. It's not like putting together a bicycle for your kid's Christmas, right? Where if you miss a step, it doesn't work. That's not the way it works with Jesus. It's not that perfectly laid out. It's steps forward, and then it feels like we take lots of steps back. And then steps forward and steps back. But we just journey with people who are on the journey. So this morning, I want to invite us into a time of communion. So if you're at home, I would encourage you now to grab elements. If you're in the room, I think you got elements as you came in. If you did not and you missed that when you came in, we have some back at our Connect table here in the back. You can feel free to go grab some now. And as we head into communion, I want to ask a couple questions to maybe let us to do a little examine of our own heart before we take together. What do you want from Jesus? What do you want him to do? It's a question he asked Bartimaeus. What do you want me to do? And then I think the second question that we need to ask ourselves is, God, what places am I defining your kingdom for others? In what places am I defining what it means to be following you? And then let's repent. Let's give those things to God and lay down those places where we've carried judgment. And let's walk in freedom. God cares about the person all the way from the oppressed to the oppressor. And his desire is that all would be saved through life with Jesus.